Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating Live. So this is a informal Q&A where people leave comments in the chat for, in YouTube, and I answer their hobby questions live. I happen to have some time tonight. The wife is watching a football game, and I thought, hey, let's make the best advantage of that time that we can. So my goal here is pretty simple. I have about an hour, and I'm going to try to answer any hobby-related questions you have. So this is a good way that if you're waiting on a hobby cheating video or I haven't gotten to address it in detail yet, you can ask the question here, and I can do my best to answer it. So there you go. That's the premise. So this all runs if you put some questions into the chat. So hopefully some people will start filing in. I see we've got some people watching and commenting already. And once you start leaving some questions, I'll start answering them and chatting, and we'll go from there. While I'm waiting on questions. Also, hello, the Midgard Sun in Denmark. Hi. That's probably late there, I think. I'm not sure what the time difference is. I've got to imagine it's 5 or 6 hours, but hopefully you're up late getting some good hobby in. So excellent. The weekend is always good for that. What I am working on right now is I'm working on my War Chanter. So a little War Chanter guy there. And his armor is, of course, separate. The value of sub-assemblies, that looks like nothing on the image. I love how washed out and nothing that looks. I assure you he's got lots of gradients. And then, of course, we've got his fun base, which is going to be over the top as would be expected. So that's what we're doing right now. Hobart says he's in the hurricane. Oh, well, I'm glad you've got good internet in there. That's surprising, frankly, but I suppose there's no bad time to hobby. Paul Cunert asked me, how do I feel about the phrase hobby or sorry, zenithal highlighting is a lie? I feel negative about that. Zenithal highlighting is the way that, as I've said many times, I believe everybody should paint. And if you're not zenithaling, if you're painting over black primer, I would be curious as to what exactly you're doing with your life to why you have such abundant time. Perhaps you're an immortal, some form of vampire where you don't mind the sands of the hourglass ticking away. But assuming you're not, you should probably zenithal prime. That's what I would say. All right. And yes, I know this is late for folks over in the EU. I apologize. This is when the game was happening that, bought me the time. So there you go. Mr. Mike asks, do you strip any of the models you work on? What do you use? Any tips on choosing to strip as your skill progresses? Great question. The answer is no, not really. I don't strip anything that I've done. For the most part, I keep all my models for the same reason I don't just burn old photographs. They are a representation of a thing in time. To me, they hold much the same allure and appeal. They represent where I was and what I could do and what I saw as my goals in the hobby at that time. And for the most part, I keep them as such. There have been a few exceptions, particularly old minis paint jobs I did 20 years ago that I felt were just totally worthless, and I wanted to do something new with the mini. That being said, I certainly strip my fair share of models because, I buy some stuff secondhand, of course. And I use Purple Power, pretty standard stuff. It's like a degreaser / industrial cleaner you can buy at most hardware stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, and the like. I soak for 2 days, 3 days in there, pull it out, run it under extremely hot water while wearing gloves, and use a toothbrush, and generally the paint will just fall right off, just sloughs right off. And you get back to a clean model. It's always easier with metal because paint doesn't adhere properly to metal. So, plastic can be a little harder. I let plastic soak longer, but Purple Power is safe for plastic, resin, and metal. So that's why I like it. There are more powerful agents out there, but you have to be very careful about them because some of them will melt resin and some of them will destroy plastic. So if you go anything stronger than Purple Power, make sure you know what you're doing. Like I know some people use brake fluid. I have never done such a thing. I believe that's destructive to resin. So just, read the tin and make sure you know what you're doing before you try anything more strong than that. Okay. Let's see. Is there a secret to doing checkers or triangles on orcs or Skaven? Yes, there is. Absolutely. There is absolutely a super secret. And I'm going to reveal that secret for you right now. It is this. It is a pencil. Preferably a mechanical one because it's a little straighter. But the key is before you put any paint down, you need to very lightly draw your triangles or your checkers on there. If you can use a straight edge, something that like with the checkerboard pattern, if you can use a straight edge, like say a simple piece of paper, you lay over the top of it and then draw along, can be extremely helpful. You want something that's going to guide you, but effectively you want those guides of your lines to make sure they're evenly sized before you apply the paint. And then the secret, once you get to the paint, is you want the paint to be flowing but not runny. So something like your Liquitex Flow Improver into a high pigment paint, say like a Vallejo Extra Opaque, which has an extremely high pigment density, but flows like crap unless you put Flow Aid into it, then it's smooth like butter, will let you draw really straight lines. And the key is just you're going to need to go back and correct. No matter what you do, no matter how much you draw perfectly or paint perfectly, you're always going to have to go back and like look at it and do tiny little corrections to get the lines, really aligned. But there you go. That's how you do checks and dags, as it were. Okay. Let's see. Okay, many questions. All right. All right. So Corey Bailey said, like, he likes the GW style and he wants to emulate it. And any tips for doing that? Yeah, sure. So look up the heavy metal painters and follow their blogs and their posts on Twitter and their things. So there's all the heavy metal painters have profiles on social media, and many of them actually have blogs where they post personal things about their own painting, and follow them and listen when they give you good lessons. Max and Darren Latham, and those guys are two of my favorites. They both have great blogs. They both have great tips they share. The GW style is different in that it tends to go in to out. What I mean by that is, so when I paint, I tend to have a light at a zenith and coming down and creating highlights and light points like that. The GW style tends to be in to out. Recesses are always darker, outsides and edges are always lighter. So things are kind of uniformly highlighted at edges. I think they're both artistic interpretations. I have no problem with either. But what I would encourage you to do is really, when you're looking at the box art and stuff like that, deconstruct it and think about what's different than what you're doing. Look at the little details. Like, don't just look at miniatures that are painted. Look at them. Really look at them. Look at one tiny piece. Like as I was working on this orc's armor, I went and looked at another mega boss that I really liked that had been done. And I spent a good 5 or 10 minutes staring at one armor plate, really looking at it. Notice every detail. Because the problem is your brain smooths over a lot of that stuff when you just glance at things and you don't realize and think about all the little details. It just subconsciously looks good to you. Your brain has a great way of sort of not making your conscious mind aware of the information it's taking in. But so you have to stop yourself and really, really look. But that would be my advice. Follow those painters or reach out to them on Twitter, by the way. Like a lot of them are very friendly and, would offer good advice. So that's another thing I would do. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. So Mr. Mike says, I mentioned in my hobby tips that I use nail polish racks for your paints. Are you able to show us that setup? Yeah, it's right here. Sure, I'll pull this off. Okay, so this is going to be really shaky for a moment. I apologize. Yes. So there you go. That's one of my paint racks, and those are my lights. And then that's my big demon dude I'm going to paint someday. That dude's awesome. And then more paint racks, more paint racks. There you go. You can see they're kind of organized by brand and stuff like that. And they're all obviously within reach, which is the other important key. There, that looks about right. Okay. So there you go. Hopefully that wasn't too disorienting for everybody. I apologize. Okay. Let's see. When it comes to Vallejo metal color, do you use gloss primer and metal varnish? I'm still not sure if they are really necessary. I do not use the gloss primer. I find it completely unnecessary. I will say that. Metal color is so strong, it will just generally go over anything and retain its luster and shine, especially because I don't single apply it. I think the gloss primer is more for people who are doing more of a single coat over things like airplanes, where you tend to be kind of doing this coat and then one solid coat. And then from there, you're doing things like pin washing and weathering and stuff. Most of my work has lots of different layers of it. So I don't think that's really necessary. I don't really use the varnish. I have only used it on a few occasions where the whole model was done in that steel and I really wanted to protect it. But on the whole, I find it pretty unnecessary, especially for minor parts, like if it's a sword and the edge of a shield or something. Yeah. Okay. Aviad Madar, speaking of maximizing time, got a big skirmish for Dark Age, about 30 models total. Was thinking of going non-metallic metal, but it seems like it takes ages. What do you think about non-metallic metal for army painting? Well, it's an interesting conundrum. I mean, even a lot of top-end painters prefer true metallic metal for their armies. You know, like I was talking with Marika Reimer about a year and a half ago, and who is a master of non-metallic metal, and she was saying, you know, for her army, she still prefers to use TMM because it has a natural pop, no matter the angle. That's one of the problems with non-metallic metal is that it really looks great, but under very specific lighting conditions, which often isn't the case at, say, a crappy, you know, warehouse or wherever your tournament might be held under some garbage yellow lights. And, you know, it often looks weird at different angles. My honest advice would be when it comes to army painting like that, use true metallic metal, but use non-metallic metal stylings. So still apply your rich and deep shadows, still apply your highlights of pure silvers and stuff like that. So that as it turns, the light will react still in a very metallic way. It'll have that pop even from several feet away across the table and even in different light, but it'll still act a lot like non-metallic metal without needing to rely on, you know, really good photo setups or lighting setups, etc. So there you go. All right. Roddick says primer applied by brush has a tendency to be gloopy and uneven, resulting in painting a couple of thin layers. In my case, varnish is changing how metallics look. Do you have any advice on that? Yeah, don't ever apply primer with a brush. I don't get it. I'll be completely honest. If there's somebody out there who really wants to stand up and defend it and they have great results with it, I mean, I'm sure there's a couple great painters who still do it, but I do not get brush on primer at all. It seems like just the worst way to prime. I've tried it a few times and utterly hated it. For my money, I mean, airbrush primer is how you should prime models. It's going to give you a very smooth, even coat. So when you're doing things like glazing with flesh tones or working with smooth metals, they will look correct because you're not adding any texture of thick paint. A brush almost by necessity applies paint so much thicker than an airbrush. I've talked to people who've stood up and defended it. If you really love it, I'm not going to I don't want to get in a fight with you over it. Do what you love, of course. If you like the results, great, then it's good for you. But my strong advice would be if you're already teetering on it, would be to not use brush on primer. Like get yourself a cheap airbrush setup, like a master airbrush setup for $80. Stick it somewhere and use it to zenithal prime. And even if that's all you ever did with it, it would be the most worthwhile hobby investment you've made after your wet palette. So personal feelings, but there you go. Okay. So Mega Fred says, do I have to use glazes after zenithal highlights? No, absolutely not. You can use it just as a sort of paint by numbers to help you out to know where your highlights are going to go. But it does allow you to work in much thinner paints. Even if we're not talking about a true glaze consistency, you can still work in thinner paints and you're going to get good versions of your color much faster. Don't use thick paint and just cover all your work. There's no reason to. Use a thinned paint. It doesn't need to be a glaze. Just use a thinned, good flowing, transparent paint. Acrylic paint is naturally transparent. translucent at least, sorry, use that to your advantage, and let the natural highlights and lowlights that your zenithal has done show through some. It doesn't need to be everything or the final thing. You can go back and touch things up or deepen things with your brush afterward. I do all the time. But it just sort of is a starting point to work from. Does it have to be a glaze consistency? Absolutely not. No. Okay. Many questions. Any tips on painting with no electricity? I'm in Tampa, Florida. No, I have none. My power, real talk, my power was out yesterday when I woke up, for just because it was out in my neighborhood, and I was like, well, can't paint this morning. Like, if you've got sunlight, sure, like, go outside and paint, I guess, is the good answer. The sun is a great natural light to paint under, but but barring the sun, which, given this situation, I think we don't have, you have to have good light to paint. Otherwise, you're going to kill your eyes. What is non-metallic metal painting technique or paint type? No, non-metallic metal is a painting technique. It uses some series of normal paints, normal matte acrylic paints, to replicate the effect of metal in microcosm, because true metallic metal, when put on and just allowed to reflect, doesn't reflect properly in scale. That is to say, if you've ever seen a suit of gold armor that's fairly ornate and detailed, like what your miniature has, there are tons of lowlights and highlights and light catches that are not accurately reflected when you shrink that down to this size, because it cannot physically interact with light in the same way as something that's 6 feet tall, as opposed to something that's an inch tall. So non-metallic metal seeks to recreate those light spreads and catches. It also looks really good in box art. It's easier to photograph. So yeah, it's a more time-intensive technique, and it can look really great when done properly. Okay, Brian says, how do you plan on bringing out the detail in the Brute's armor? That beaten, angly armor has been stumping me on what to do, other than maybe just edge highlights, which aren't my favorite. Well, I'm doing it on this armor right now, and I'll tell you what I did was, so I started by using the airbrush to sketch in some basic values, where I wanted things, what areas of the armor were lighter, what areas of the armor were darker. Actually, let's back it up a step. So I zenithaled it, I glazed it one color, and then I took a pure white dry brush and extremely lightly dry brushed over the edges. Like, my problem with most people's, when dry brushing is not a bad thing. Dry brushing in the way most people do it is a bad thing, where they have tons of paint on their brush. I use an extremely soft bristled brush, and I have basically no paint on it. So to get the paint to show on those ridges, I had to do this. Now paint is showing. Okay. That's real time. Now, and the point being is that then you only catch the ridges and you don't have that chalky look. Then I went in and etched it, or used the airbrush to sketch in some basic values, made some areas darker, made some areas lighter, then went back in, which is going to cover some of that edge highlighting I just did, edge dry brushing, I guess we'll call it. And then I went back in and sort of, in places where I wanted to strengthen it, did some very careful edge highlighting. So I didn't trace the whole thing, because that doesn't seem right. But where the sort of angles were most pronounced, I then caught it. You'll see when I put up the model, and I'll add it to the list to do an actual hobby cheating video about it. It seems like an actual good thing to discuss. And then I started etching in the values on the individual plates. So dark to light transitions on the individual plates. So you'll see. Hopefully that helps. In description, I'll do a video on it. Crazy Horse said, how did I paint that orange fat frog? He was great, and I hope you enjoy him. Crazy Horse. He was great. How did I do it? Zenithal, rust as the brown to undercolor. So that is this brown, rust, Vallejo model, air rust, and then light rust, which is out of my reach. It's over there, which is very orangey brown as a midtone. Random tan on top, which is a very nice yellow white, random tan. Then a mix of red and yellow ink out of the airbrush to lay down my values, and then brush worked from there to deepen shadows, to bring up edges. Lots of like, so the trick with orange in general is you don't try to build up the orange. You use a white or a off-white yellow and you sort of blend that in, and then you glaze over that with your yellow or your orange. And you keep doing that successively, repeatedly. And that gives you a really vibrant, intense orange. So there you go. Okay. Patrick Fisher, for Sylvaneth, I was thinking of painting Ironbark Clan, but I'm not sure how to balance all the dark colors. It's dark purple, dark green, and dark brown bark. Sure, I think that could be awesome. Purple and green obviously work great together, and dark brown is a good set off against that. My answer is maybe, this is the time to lean into the GW style. Have some fairly clean, pronounced edge highlights or a couple good pop colors. Take your green and have some lighter versions of it in some places, glowing eyes, glowing runes, things like that. Same with the purple, have a couple edge highlights of the brighter color tips. Do short, intense highlights. Little spots of very bright color scattered around the model will really stand out against a dark background. If I light a match right now, if I had struck a match sitting here in this light, it would be almost invisible. If I turned all the lights off in the room and struck a match, it would look like I just turned on the sun, right? Not really, but you get the point. Like, brightness is really a question of a light source is really a question of what the context is around it. So a few bright spots of light to pop out things like eyes, face, a few edges, claws, the like little shooty out of the staff, whatever, you can pick your things, your runes, they're etched into their bark. All those things could be great ways to really make it pop. Okay. So Greg says, speaking of primers, is it better to choose any, I don't know what that says, any Thiel highlights starting with a black undercoat or a great undercoat? I'm not sure what you're asking there, Greg. You'll have to re-ask me the question. I'm not sure what you mean. Okay. Let's see. Oh, so Helkazin says the reason why I use brush on primer is the weather. Rattle cans won't work with Finland's winter, and I don't have room for airbrushing. Well, okay, two things I'll say to that. One, an airbrush can be set up in a surprisingly small amount of space. Caleb Wissenbach is famous for walking around with a duffel bag with an airbrush compressor and an airbrush thing in it at conventions that he pulls out and will airbrush sitting there under a table. If he can airbrush under a table in the corner of a room in a convention and do good work, you probably have the room in your house somewhere. I'm just saying. He's literally doing it under your breakfast nook. So that's number one. But that being said, let's assume it's the case you don't have the space and you've got to stick with a rattle can. As long as the can is warm and the fig is warm, and you can do it in cold temperatures. The trick is you make sure the can is nice and warm, room temperature inside your house. Make sure the fig is warm. You walk out into your garage or something like that, into a covered area, and you spray the miniature, turn around, walk back in your house, put the fig in the bathroom or some area of your house that has a good fan or air circulation. I use my bathroom. My bathroom has like a fan in it. I think most bathrooms do. And you turn the fan on and you close the door and you let it dry. Your house is generally low humidity, even in the winter, that will prime and dry fine. So just, you don't have to leave the thing sit outside. I hear a lot of people say that. I don't get it. I've primed in the dead of winter with a rattle can. And as long as I'm out there for 20 seconds, the can cannot get cold. The fig cannot get cold. I'm not doing it in direct wind or temperature. I'm doing it in a covered garage. I just open the door and wear a mask, by the way. Like, it's a good, always wear proper ventilation protection. But if you've got a little mask for anything, you can just pop that on and you're in and out and good to go. Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay, so Greg re-asked this question. Would it be better to start with black or gray undercoat when doing zenithal highlights? Neither. The answer, in my opinion, the perfect color is Vallejo Surface Primer German Panzer Gray, which is a black gray. So there you go. That's what I like. I have found the best results with that. I've tried true black. I've tried normal grays. One is not dark, or one is too dark. The other's not dark enough. So German gray, which is not nice, wonderful black, gray, charcoal almost color. Let's see. Okay. Just reading through the comments. Sorry to okay, so Lewis says, what paint shakers do I have? Do you mean agitators? Like what agitators do I use in my paint pots? Well, there are two options I'll give you if that's what you mean. I don't have like a formal paint shaker other than my hands. I have these two paint shakers. But agitators, so you can buy these little beads from War Colors, which I highly recommend. They're real nice. They're obviously not, they're never going to rust. They're not anything like that. Those are good if your paint is just needs some basic agitation. If you've got something that really needs some good shaking, like standard scale 75 or Vallejo metal color, this is your answer. An old pewter fig that has no other value. I take my pliers to these guys and cut it into about 6 parts, and I drop them in there. This will mix your paint. Put a big chunk of pewter in there. Never, ever, ever use anything ferrous. Never anything that's going to rust. That is the key. So old figures, if they're, as long as they're pewter or something that isn't iron based, you're fine. Okay. Fahid says, do you magnetize then paint or paint then magnetize? I don't ever magnetize. But that being said, well, that's not true. I have on a few occasions. And the answer is magnetize first. It's always better because magnetizing is kind of a messy process. You're going to be drilling things. You're going to be trying to line things up. You may screw things up. Your magnets might not perfectly align, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, magnets makes it easier to do sub-assembly painting because once all the arms and guns and stuff are magnetized, you can just stick them to something metal and then paint them on that. So that becomes a really easy way to hold the gun or the whatever it happens to be, you know, the arm of the creature that you've magnetized out. So always magnetize first. Then while I'm actually painting, by the way, I'll take a little piece of, you know, Tamiya tape, cut a little square, and I will put a tiny little square over that joint that's going to go together after I sort of prime it black, just so I don't, so paint doesn't build up in there and cause the magnet to not get covered. Like I'll tape over the magnet area. Like I'll put a little square over the magnet area and then I'll prime everything. So I want the color to be on the area around the magnet, but not over the magnet itself. That way the two magnets keep a nice clean contact. Okay. Let's see. John Simpson says, what is my, like, that he's not a fan of the GW style and he wants to know what I think of it. I mean, I think it is a style choice, just like anything else. I don't favor it, but there are lots of painting styles I don't favor. But that's my personal taste. I don't think it's in any way less skilled or valuable. I think it's just one artistic impression. This is in the end art, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. And the way that the heavy metal team does it and the art does it, it pops very well on boxes. Like it has a real presence on a box, which obviously is the reason they're painting that, because they want to put a cool picture on the box. So you buy the box. And so I get it. And it's just as difficult of a style as anything else. I don't think there's any easier way. It's not a shortcut or some simple thing. And so the painters who are doing it have a tremendous amount of skill. My answer is whatever grabs you. Like there's lots of different styles. I tend to favor more like the French style of high contrast and glazing and stuff. But I mean, there's 20 different, you know, valid ways to paint high-end minis, and they're all perfectly fine. It's whatever you like. Okay. What type of material do you like most to work with? Resin, white metal, or plastic? From Vermilion. Absolutely plastic, unabashedly, unashamedly, plastic every time. The higher quality, the better. I am an absolute snob elitist when it comes to the cast. I only like hyper fine, hyper sharp casts. Squidgy details drive me bonkers. So there you go. Which means that like Games Workshop plastic is good. Malifaux makes incredibly good plastic. I love their stuff. Weird, that is to say, sorry. The game being Malifaux. And there's, you know, there are certainly others out there as well. Actually, you know, things like Osprey makes actually pretty nice, simple minis for things like Frostgrave in plastic, as another example. So it doesn't all have to be like high-end expensive stuff. It just has to be a quality cast. Okay. A random mini painter. How would you go about painting a red hot metal effect? For example, a piece of steel being forged. It depends where you're at and how hot it is at that moment. It's a complicated question you're asking. I'll do my best to answer it briefly. I would direct you. I know a random mini painter. You're in the PMP. Go back and look at Omri Arbev's Stormcast. He all of his Stormcast he did as heated metal from the inside, and he worked a lot on that effect. And in the end, it looks really good. The short answer is you need dark areas, mostly dark areas. Like if you're not talking about the whole blade is literally red hot, because that's different and harder to capture. If we're talking about an inner heat that is heating the metal, say like the center of the hammer is hot, like what he was doing, then you want a tiny area of hot space that quickly moves from like white hot briefly through yellow orange and then into a deep whole red and then out to almost a black. And that you've got to run that whole transition, and that's what will create the illusion of heat. Now, if you're talking about like a super hot sword, then you've got to think like a lightsaber. You've got to have hot edges and a hot spot that then goes out into yellow and orange. It's going to be a little harder to carry off. In reality, that would cast light, and so that's how we tend to know it's hot and not just an orange thing, because it's throwing light around. So you're often going to be talking OSL if you really want to capture that effect, because you have to sell the heat emanating off of it. If we're literally talking like the whole sword is red hot. Okay. Do. Cheeky question number 2. What is sketch painting? Sounds quick and fun, but is it? Yes, it is. Sketch painting, I think Matt DiPietro coined the term, but I mean, I've been preaching this for a long time. That's not me trying to take away from Matt. Sketch painting is zenithal highlighting. So you start with zenithal, which you can go back and look at like my second video. I'm talking about zenithal highlighting. And then you go in and with a brush very quickly, you sketch in the values. You deepen your shadows. You put some black and darker colors into shadows. You put some white and brighter colors onto the top, onto highlights. And then you just use thin paints for everything else. You use the transparent paints. You quickly throw them around. You're basically relying on glazes. So it's just using the undershading thing that I frequently champion and talk about. That's really all it is. And you're using the white, black, grisaille, however you say that, Grisalle. I don't know how to pronounce it. Underneath to set the values of your color. Okay. What colors would you use to paint a jade kind of effect on a weapon? Crazy Horse, rather than rattle them off, go back and watch my first how to paint marble video where I talk about the stippling effect. That uses a jade color scheme, and I would recommend that set of colors. Like it was some kind of, I don't remember it off the top of my head is why I'm telling you there. But like I believe I used Vallejo game color, jade green, turquoise, blue green, and probably some kind of light blue or white. And I imagine that's how I would want to capture it as well. I'd probably use something like if I wanted to set off some of the darker colors, I'd probably use like a purple or a purple red to create shadows mixed with the green. So like a dark purple or dark purple red. Okay. All right. If I use Vallejo liquid gold for a base layer, is it possible to glaze or highlight over it with water-based acrylics? You betcha. Absolutely. I have a video where I do it when I talk about one of the first videos on how to add sort of non-metallic pop to true metallic metal on gold. You'll see me do that exact thing with inks. I do it all the time. Yes, highly recommend. Do that. Liquid gold is incredible. It's like gold flake, but you still got to create your light and dark pattern on it. I prefer inks, by the way, rather than paint over the top, especially the Inkintensity set works really well over it. So there you go. That's for my 2 cents. Scale Color Inkintensity is an ink set that Banshee designed, and it's the best set of inks around. So there you go. Okay. Rob Johnson, I have a question. I'm doing a Moonlit Verminlord in blues. Will it look okay to use more than one kind of blue, or should I just be changing the amount of white in one blue color? No, it will look okay to use a couple different kinds of blues. Painting creatures in unusual light is very difficult. There's an ambiance to that you're trying to set there. So just think about what you're doing, because like what I mean is you okay. If you're trying to paint a creature in moonlight, then everything has to be in moonlight. Colors all have to be desaturated. Um, think of like the song, right? The Knights in White Satin or whatever. Under moonlight, you know, red is gray and yellow white, but we decide which is real and which is the illusion. That's real. Like in moonlight, color is knocked out. Everything is very blue tinged because moonlight is a very white blue light, but also just in darkness like that, things lose their intensity of their color. Red does look gray, yellow does look just white. So you want to knock the color out of everything too. You have to desaturate your colors down. And then things like the base, like when you put him on the base has to be desaturated, all the colors on it. If you like set him down and use like some super bright saturated colors or plants, he's not in moonlight anymore. He's just a blue rat, right? Because your brain is going to key in immediately to any inconsistency in that image. Everything has to sell that environment. Okay. But yeah, certainly you can use different blues. 100%. Yes. They should just all be desaturated blues. Okay. Desaturate blue with a complementary color. So somebody respond right after that. Yes, absolutely. Orange generally being something that's good to desaturate your blue with. You can also just get paint that is desaturated blues. Scale 75, their non-metallic metal steel set comes with great desaturated blues. I mean, there are many model color makes some desaturated blues for military stuff. So they're out there. Like you can do it yourself, or you can pre-buy them. Either way is fine. Okay. From Greg, follow-up question. Could I prime the Mini with MIG brand Panzer Gray pigment? My girlfriend thinks I'm an idiot for asking. Panzer Gray pigment. Do you mean like taking the actual pigment, like the... I don't have... Here. Do you mean like taking pigment and then turning it into paint and priming it that way? Or do you mean just dusting the thing with raw pigment? I would not recommend that. Let me say that. Like in general, you want your pigment to be, or you want your primer to be as thin and non-existent almost as possible. You want it to basically just be the thinnest possible layer that's there to hold the paint above it. So I would say no. I've never thought of or tried something like that, so I don't know how that would work. Okay. What do I think about the quality of the models for the game Infinity by Corvus Belli? I don't know how that's how they say that, but yes, Infinity. I own an Infinity Force. I own a Hacky Force. I like them. They are really beautiful models. They are the best metal models probably in existence. And I hate them like I hate hell. Because I hate metal models. They are tiny and fidgety. They have teeny tiny connection joints and pieces that I do not know how you make stick together. If they made that game in plastic, I would probably own multiple whole ranges. But that's me being an elitist. Again, this is only my personal opinion. If you like, there are so many people who love them and do incredible paint jobs on them. I mean, just they are gorgeous models that you can do unbelievably good work with if you've got the patience for metal. I do not. So I don't paint them, but there you go. Let's see. Thanks for all the tips. Any tips on if water-based matte varnish works over oils? Yeah, sure, it'll work. You just have to let the oils dry and cure completely. So like, but I, for example, on the Night Titan back there, there are many layers of varnish over top of oil paints because I successively was using oils at a couple different stages and then had to varnish. But you've got to let it dry. Like, oil doesn't really ever totally dry completely, blah, blah, blah. I understand. But my point is, like, I wouldn't put that varnish on for, depending on the thickness of the paint, which it should be pretty darn thin. And depending if you used like drying things like linseed oil or things that'll make it dry quicker, depending on how you played with the oils. You know, I would give it, if we're talking just like stock oil paint right out of that and you haven't used any oils to mess with drying time, bare minimum 48 hours. Before I would put matte varnish over it, but yes, you can. Okay. Let's see. When I want to paint a cold night-like atmosphere, should I add a little blue to the colors as I understand it? This would work fine for cool colors, but what about colors like yellow? You need to, so I think I kind of answered this, but yes, The answer is you sort of desaturate everything, but there are slight amounts of blue that will get into most things and be in certain places. Roman Lapat shared a great picture of his environment and ambiance class that he did at Nova. And he showed a picture of a guy standing outside in normal daylight wearing a blue shirt. And you could see, and he's like, really look, and you can see the blue in his beard reflecting under his nose and things like that. And when you look, because with that prompt and you really look, not just what your brain tells you is there, you see those blues. So my answer is yes. And things like yellows, you want to just desaturate them. Like they should not be bright yellows. They should be very washed out, white, gray, that kind of thing, with only the slightest hint of yellow. Your brain will fill in the difference. It will get what's going on. I would also point you to a massive Voodoo article called "All Cats Are Black at Night." It was written by Roman Lapat. And it goes into an excellent color theory on what happens to colors at night. So all cats are black at night on massive Voodoo, which, by the way, everybody should be reading the articles. Like the tutorials there are incredible. Okay. That Mortarion is bananas. How long till the Nurgle army don't lie? Forever. I will never own a Nurgle army. I very much enjoyed painting the Nurgle Death Guard guy I did. I thought it was really fun. I'm not saying I would never paint another individual model. But you know, Mortarion would be an interesting challenge, but it's not worth it for me. It's not where my passion lies. And I have to love an army to want to paint it or be very inspired. So there will never be a Nurgle army on my table. Sorry. Okay. Is there a quick and dirty way to do green field bases during a darker time of the day, like dusk? I'm doing an Eldar Harlequin army and want the bases to be more muted compared to the models. Sure. Pick tufts and grass that have more brown in them, and they'll look darker. And wash the grass. Like you should be painting your flock anyways. Like don't just put tufts and flock and stuff down. Like it should be painted. So like when you put tufts on there, take some Athonian camo shade or some Agrax earth shade or something like that. Run that thinly through the tufts and get that grass, get that bright green out of there. Get it more dark and brown and nighttime, right? That's a good way to go. You can also, strangely, take a little white or white gray and very, very lightly dry brush the tops of your tufts. That will also knock color out. It's the opposite, but like clearly even at dusk, it's going to be catching some kind of light. And so replacing what would be bright green with a white or a white gray or a near white or something like that will also desaturate the color. And if you do both, what you get is something that isn't very green anymore. Okay. Do I have any experience in using polymer clay in modeling? No. I have none. That's interesting. I would say if you find some interesting stuff, hey, I'm always looking for more tools and things to integrate in. So I have no experience in. I can't help you on that one. Sorry. But if you find some good results, share it up. Okay. Let's see. Chris Smith, I prime in Luftwaffe gray to give a middle ground for colors. If I zenithal, will it cause the model to show a higher contrast when airbrushing the base coats, or is it mainly for when brushing? Well, I mean, again, my advice would always be to zenithal, whether you're airbrushing or brush painting or whatever. If you're going to use a single color, yes, using a mid-tone like a bone, a brown, or a mid-tone gray is going to be the best thing to start from, as opposed to black or white, because it lets you go either direction. So if you're absolutely determined not to zenithal, then yes, use a mid-tone single color based on whatever you're trying to go to. Like if you're going to do a lot of flesh, probably bone or bone brown or brown. If you're going to do green, purples, blues, probably a mid-tone gray. Or just the color you're going to paint in, by the way. Like that's also perfectly valid. If you're doing ultramarines, just blue. Ultramarine blue, Okay. Would using Vallejo game model air paints with a wet palette make them too thin? No. No, there is no such thing as too thin, especially not just off putting it on a wet palette. Absolutely not. I mean, I paint in extremely thin paints. Like, picture how thin you think I mean right now. I mean 3 times as thin as what you're talking, as what is in your head. Okay. So, and I have to do a lot of work to get them that thin. So no, absolutely not. I put them on, there's some on my wet palette right this minute. It'll be fine. It's actually great. You get now, I mean, you don't get coverage out of that, right? So like you have very different goals. I use it for highlighting and shading, in which case I don't want coverage. I want very thin, translucent layers that I can manipulate and void blend and stuff like that. Okay. Any advice on buying and using an electrostatic grass applicator for flock? Not really. I mean, I know trained people do it. I don't have enough of, I don't use regular grass flock very often. I tend to use tufts and cut them or shape them and stuff like that. I mean, with grass, you can get that effect, stand-up effect. What I tend to do is take the grass and shake it and get it really aerated and fluffy, and then grab a chunk and just lightly, repeatedly stipple it onto it, and then kind of pull it up and down like this. And, that gets enough of the grass standing up. I feel pretty happy about it. Because I rarely use it. And even when I do, it's only some minimal part of a base that's usually then going to get covered over by leaves and logs and other dirt. So it's more just like setting a base for it. I mean, I'm sure it would work and look good. It does. It's a neat effect, but I've never felt the need to play with it on just bases. Okay. All right. You'll have to ask my wife, Crazy Horse. Okay. Any tips for painting a stone weapon? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Make it look like real stone. I know that sounds like a flippant answer, but I mean it. Stone is rough. It's uneven. It has lots of colors in it. It is not just gray and white. Stone is stippled in random colors. There are white and chunks and everything. So it needs to look organic and random. So stippling patterns. Take dark, stipple it down here and some shadows. Take white, stipple it on. Take gray, stipple it on. Take some mid-tone brown, wash it. Do that. Do your stipples again. Like, work in some reds, some greens, or whatever, like lightly. And then, put some cracks in it to make it look like stone. Like, put a crack in the weapon. All those things will sell the effect. If you watch the video I did on doing weathered, realistic looking stone, or if you watch the urban ruin basing painting video, do what I do there with my gray stone, but do it to your weapon instead. So there you go. Do you have any tricks for determining if a color is hot or cold? Sure. I mean, does it contain, which side of the color wheel is it on, is the simplest thing. That's not always true, but it's a good rule of thumb. I mean, if it contains red, orange, or yellow in any way, it's hot. If it contains the blue side of green, or blue, or the blue side of purple, it's cold. The real answer is, that is, say if the green contains yellow, it becomes a warm green. If the purple contains red, it becomes a warm purple. Blue is just always cold. My answer is really find the absolute color. Everything has an absolute color. So look at it and figure out what it is. We'll play a fun game. Okay, so here you go. What is the absolute color of this paint? Okay. If you answered brown, no, it's red. This is red, is the absolute color of this, okay? Because this is a ruddy brown. This is mixed, and the color that's still here to get to this brown, because this is all this paint is mixed from, a short amount of primary colors usually. To get to this, red is what is still showing. So when you find the absolute color, you'll generally be able to tell whether it's a warm or cold color. So if you've got weird things, right? With white, does it have yellow or brown in it instead of blue or gray? That determines if it's a warm or cold white. Yeah. So there you go. Okay. Oh, and he said, okay, so for such a skin tone. Yeah, so skin is really interesting because it has a lot of different tones in it all simultaneously. I mean, my answer on skin tone, I could do a whole multi-hour video. Like, we could probably talk about skin tone for 20 hours and not get close to all of it. But what I'll say is that skin tone needs to have everything in it. Skin tone in general needs to display all three primary colors in some ways. And skin tone itself is just the three primary colors put together with white. So like right now, look at my face. I mean, you probably are, and that's not pleasant for anyone, I understand. But let's do a little bit. I'll show you what I mean. This on my bright, reflective, crazy bald head. Here's some white hot spot. This is red. This is warm. But look here in these shadows. Do you see the blues that's bouncing from this white light I have here and reflecting off of like the cold color, the sort of blues and stuff I have down on my desk? These are cold colors down here. In general, think of it like this. This part of the face is blue. This part of the face is red, and this part of the face is yellow. I know that sounds overtly simplistic, but that's the sort of tonal variation that's underlying the flesh tones there. So, and that's because facial hair tends to turn things blue, cold, black. Rosy cheeks and nose tends to turn things red, and your forehead reflects a lot of light, tends to be yellow. So there you go. Okay. What colors would you use and how would you go about painting an orange ethereal effect? Oh, Lord. And have it not look like fire, right? Because if you go into yellow, it's just going to look like fire, like really weird fire. Sort of reverse fire. I don't know, man. You'd have to let me think about that one. I honestly don't have a good answer. I've never thought about doing orange ethereal effects. Like, I suppose I would just do it as fire and call it a day and go up into yellow. Because the problem is if you add white to orange, it's going to turn into skin. Okay, like that's what it is. Skin tone is just orange plus white. And you'll get a pretty basic pink skin tone. So like it's not the kind of thing you can really highlight like that. I suppose constant undershading would be a way to build it up. So like you would do I would probably do one color of orange and then a near warm white. And I would just do orange and then I would layer in highlights on the outer parts of the ghost in that near white and then glaze orange and then some whites again and then glaze orange and then some whites again and glaze orange, and each glaze would get successively thinner. That's the best answer. Hence never mixing the paints, so I never get actual flesh tone. That's probably the best answer I can give you. I've never tried to do it, but that's off the top of my head what I would do. Okay. All right. So let's see. So Bjarni says, I recently went through some hobby hardship after my mix of gloss and regular Nuln oil created a finish that basically stopped paint sticking to the model properly. Any idea why and how to resolve? I can tell you why. Yeah, sure. Because they didn't get shaken well enough. And so you got pure gloss medium, basically. You got an amount of that because that'll separate and naturally rise to the top. And that got too thick on there and create a glossy surface that paint doesn't want to stick to anymore. The answer, by the way, would be to reapply a thin layer of, if you could do it through an airbrush, that's your perfect world, of sort of matte varnish. Give the paint something it will stick back to. Paint will tend to stick to matte varnish quite well. A couple rounds of Tester's Dull Coat out of a rattle can. That would probably solve your problem as well. Okay. Malik says he's just signing in. Can I repeat everything that I've missed? Sure. Here we go from the top now. Okay. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss everything. Okay. All right. Forge of Wonders. Here's a key question. Is the reason you're doing this stream tonight because your wife is out at the football game? Yes, I started this by actually saying that. That is correct. There is a football game right now, and my wife is watching football with a bunch of friends, and I am at home painting miniatures. So that is why this stream is happening. You are exactly correct. Without shame. She's a big football fan. She loves it, watches it all the time. So I couldn't care less. Okay. Let's see. There we go. Hey, look at that. I caught up. Bam. I got to the end. I got through it. And we've got a few more minutes left. Like I said, I do these for an hour. I'm sure I could just keep answering questions all day, but I think I've got about 5 to 10 minutes left. So let's do some final questions, and we'll get through those, and then we'll call it a successful Q&A. Okay. Let's see. So, what paint do you highlight the surfaces of black or white armor? Well, I hate pure black and pure white armors, and I tend to avoid them because they are very annoying to highlight because both of them are very near they're the natural point already. You can't get whiter, you can't get hotter than white, you can't get darker than black. So my answer is one, move your color in some. When I do white armor, you never do actual white armor. You do a near white, gray, or white green, or white yellow, or white brown, or whatever. I don't care. Pick whatever thing is appropriate. And I start there, and then deep in the shadows, and then I can highlight in true white. With black, same thing. I use a black gray, and for my highlights, you go up to either straight gray or blue gray or purple gray, purple black or purple gray black or something like that, or blue gray black, depending on what you want. It also depends on what style you're going for. If you're talking about edge highlighting, you can be a little more aggressive. You still don't want to like jump way up the value chart up to something like mid-tone gray, but something like that. My favorite things to highlight black with are the Secret Weapon tire paints. So this is rubber and rubber highlight. I find these are excellent highlights for black armor, especially if you start with not true black, and then that lets you, by the way, shade with true black. And the armor will still read black to the eye. Most things you look at in life aren't really true black. Like you look at this case, that reads black to your eye. That is not true black. Like if I held up, which one's more black? Okay. So, the point being is that you can always go down and up if you don't start with the true colors. So that would be my answer. Okay. Real question from Malik Senior. Recommend a set of inks. Inktensity scale 75. It is the best set of inks on the market. It has the most use. It is incredible. It is a wonderful, beautiful set of inks. It is glossy, but you can control that. It is perfect for making filters for face tones for the blue, red, yellow I talked about. It's great for doing shading on true metallic metals. It's wonderful for it has a color called Intense Wood, which aside from having the funniest name for a paint ever, is also sorcery in a bottle. If you have something zenithal or dry brushed, that like a piece of wood, and it's zenithal and dry brushed, and then you just apply a layer of Intense Wood over it, it becomes wood. It just looks like real wood. It is magic in a bottle. Bottom line. And the red and yellow inks are great for adding ink into your paint to increase the saturation, or just using on their own. So it is by far the best ink set I have ever used. I actually have an upcoming hobby cheating video here in the next couple weeks. I am going to do a comparison of every ink on the market by all the major games manufacturers. Just like I did my miniature paint guide, I'm going to do a miniature ink guide. So there you go. Okay. Abby, it says, that's a good point. How do you tell someone you just started dating about your obsession with little army men? I don't know what to tell you on that one, man. I've got no good advice. I was upfront with it. My wife knew I was a nerd. I knew my wife for many years before I started dating her. She was my former girlfriend's best friend. So she knew I was a nerd. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Yeah, by the way, the War Colors inks are actually really fantastic. Thank you, Roddick, for mentioning them. They would be my second set I would recommend. The War Colors inks have a much wider range of colors. They are very glossy, but they're a real pleasure to work with. And they have some really fantastic colors, and it's a huge set for a pretty low cost. The War Colors inks, as usual, scale 75 and War Colors, basically those are the two things I tend to recommend because they're the two things I like. But I use a lot of different types of inks. So Okay. Is there a brush-on primer you know worth to be using? No. There are no brush-on primers I believe are worth using. Simple answer. Okay. So he said the question was asked about, do I plan to make a video about all non-straight translucent paints, inks, etc. Yes, I'm going to focus on things that are actually inks, so or shades or stuff like that. So it'll, you know, the GW glazes and basically everything out there that's called an ink. So Army Painters inks and tones and watercolors inks, scale 75, Vallejo, P3. There's more. I'm forgetting them, but they're all around me. I'll use them all. I'll probably include like plasma fluid and stuff like that in there too. The ghost tints. I probably won't cover like the enamel stuff from. I tend to stick to acrylics, so I probably won't cover like enamel based inks or that kind of thing. Okay. Oh yeah, so it was clarified like it's quite new when he sees inks, translucents, you know, Tamiya X27 and so on. Sure. I'll do a video talking about all that. It may help to go back and also watch. I have a video on ghost tints and candy coats. I think it's Hobby Cheating like 31 or 32. I would say go back and watch that. I talk about some uses for that stuff. It might help. So there you go. Okay. Let's see. No, Rob, I have not tried out that white specialty paint that you keep reminding me to buy. I really should. Okay. Do you airbrush varnish? Yes, I do. What PSI do you use? Generally somewhere between 12 and 18. So there you go. I turn it down sometimes a little, but not much. And I do it from a fair distance and lightly, and I let it dry and then do it again if I feel I need it again. Have I used Watercolor One Coat? Are they any good? Yes and yes. They give you much better coverage. It's still not like extra opaque level coverage or anything, but they're much stronger in their coverage. I don't tend to like heavy coverage except in very particular circumstances, but if you are looking for a stronger base coat color, that's the way to go. Okay. What are the forks for? I don't know where there are forks. Okay. Is there is this like this what you're talking about? Right here? My fork? Yeah, the forks are for making icicles. You cut the tines off of forks and you can melt them and make icicles to stick on the bottom of things. There you go. Also makes great ice stalagmites. So there you go. Okay. So let's see. Liberty Prime. I'm just doing some snow bases for my Beast Claw Raiders. I'm attempting my first water effect on the bases. Any tips on material and color? Yes, go back and watch my Ice Lake bases hobby cheating number 5. That will be all the tips that I would say. And then, you know, like I can't give better advice than everything I cover in that video, because I cover how to undershade it, what to put in the realistic water effect, all of that to get something that looks like cold ice. Oh, doing the icicles. Is there a vid for that? No, I don't think I ever did a video for that. That'd be a fun thing to cover. I'll have to talk about that sometime because I use that trick very frequently. It's all throughout my Tzeentch army. Like in the Ice Lake bases and stuff like that, I'll frequently do ice shooting up out. Like if you want to do spikes and things shooting up out. By the way, it doesn't have to be ice. They could also be just like normal stalactites and stuff. Fork tines are really your friend. I bought a giant like 1,000-pack plastic forks for just my general purpose use. So plastic forks for days, yo. Woo! And so I just will take them and cut the tines off and throw the fork away. It's great. It's a wonderful hobby tool. Okay. So let's see. So I will add that to the list for doing spiky stalagmites and ice bases. All right. So there we go. That was about another 10 minutes. I think we've come to the end of our time. I'll tell you what, next person who leaves a question, I'll answer the next question and then I'll call it there. So we got one more question. Who will leave the last question? All right. I'm waiting. It's going to be no one. That'll be funny. We'll sit here for an hour in silence, which I think will be pretty entertaining, really, with all things come to it. So, but I'll answer one more. And while I'm waiting on that, I will say, I hope this has been helpful. It's been very fun to do 100 hobby cheating videos. I hope they've been helpful. I try to do these live Q&As as often as I can. Obviously they're, it's in the chain of doing all the other videos. Sometimes it's a bit time intensive, but I really do love it. I hope you find it helpful. Oh, there you go. Paul got it. Do I like cookies? Nope. I don't eat any kind of sugar, like artificial sugar. So I don't eat cookies or cake or chocolate. I haven't had chocolate or anything like that for about 10 years, 12 years now, probably. So there you go. That's why I'm not a little round fat kid anymore. I'm just a mildly fat adult. So there you go. That's the final question. No, I'll answer one more. Aviad says, artist color for white, yes or no? Seeing more and more painters switching to it. Yes. So what he's asking here is the heavy body acrylic white. So this could be golden acrylics or artist colors. There's a couple different ones out there. But yeah, it's a heavy body acrylic. It's a much thicker thing. My answer is it's great, but it's a very, 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 very different paint to use. So you can't paint with it like your normal paints. It's a push on. It's a put on and push on the model paint, not a drag your brush and there you go, that's done. No. So there you go. Okay. Dr. Pepper, sugar, nobody. Diet Dr. Pepper, always. Only diet. No sugar in here, my friend. Just a whole bunch of other chemicals that'll probably kill me and solidify my insides, but not sugar. So cheers to that. There you go. Okay. So hopefully that answered some questions. Appreciate everybody watching. Thank you. I really do hope this is helpful. If you have suggestions for other hobby cheating videos you want to see me cover, I'll add the icicle thing that was mentioned to my list. I keep a running list. I will tell you the list grows faster than I can shrink it by making videos. But I'm always looking for more suggestions, and I try to tackle these things as quickly as possible. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching. It's really appreciated. Thank you for watching over these last 100 videos. I look forward to making 100 more, and I hope it's really helpful. And so thank you very much. Thanks for all the great questions. And I hope I helped you get some paint on some gray plastic, and we're fighting that war against the gray. But as always, we'll see you next time. Everybody have a wonderful evening.